This last session is cosmic morning to cosmic noon, and we'll start with Professor Alison Coil, galaxy protocluster selection at redshifts greater than 2.
All right. If someone wants to go outside and clap real loud, there's still people out there, I can't tell. Okay, I'm going to talk about galaxy protocluster selection. So this is work led by Devonte Baxter, who is an NSF postdoc fellow at UC San Diego, and he's also a UC Chancellor's postdoc fellow. And this is work done with Ethan Nadler, who's here at the conference as well. These are our other collaborators. Oh, and I totally forgot. I was supposed to start that movie. It was like the first time I was going to get to show a movie in a talk. Anyway, okay, so in recent years, more papers have been identifying galaxy protoclusters. So what are people interested in doing with these? There's several different, lots of different questions people are asking with protoclusters. One is just the growth, understanding the growth of the most massive galaxies. So for BCGs in the local universe, the relative contributions from mergers, secular evolution, bursts of star formation, feedback, regulation. Also, the role of environment in galaxy evolution. So, for example, do enhanced merger rates and high gas fractions in protoclusters trigger extreme star formation? And when does the environment begin to suppress star formation in protocluster galaxies? Also, the formation enrichment of the ICM. So when and how does the intracluster medium first assemble? And which feedback processes drive early metal enrichment of the ICM? So there's other questions that people are interested in asking with protoclusters. This is just a few. It turns out that detecting and characterizing protoclusters is really challenging because cluster searching techniques that work at redshift 0 don't work at high redshift. So, for example, extended X-ray and thermal SZ, because of surface brightness dimming and an underdeveloped ICM, makes detecting protoclusters via these methods this says infeasible, very, very difficult. There's a handful of SC detected protoclusters around redshift 2. There's a great poster outside with one at redshift 4, but there's like 4 known. This is not a great way to go identifying large samples of protoclusters. So these just don't work really well at high redshift. Also, red sequence doesn't work at high redshift because at early times, massive ellipticals that make up the red sequence haven't formed yet. They're not red. So that doesn't work. So basically, redshift 0 cluster selection doesn't work for protoclusters. So what people tend to do is they find overdensities of galaxies, but their different papers are selecting galaxy samples in very different ways to find protoclusters. So there are lots of papers that look at sort of normal, but there's still selection biases here, star-forming galaxies, so Lyman break galaxies, or Lyman alpha or H alpha emitters, which will have very high star formation rates, maybe lower stellar masses. Other samples are using dusty starbursting luminous galaxies like submillimeter galaxies. Other samples use really massive, ultramassive galaxies, and other samples use AGN as potentially biased tracers of high redshift overdensities, particularly quasars or radio galaxies. So these are really different populations. And I'm not going to go into this in detail, but this is just to show you a handful of 6 different protoclusters around redshift 2 to 4 that are all using different techniques. So Lyman break galaxies, Lyman alpha emitters, SPECZs, H alpha emitters, submillimeter galaxies. So as an observer, one of the things that I first ask when I see these kinds of plots is, what are the selection biases doing here? Like what's the actual underlying structure here? And then how would each of these look different, if at all, under a different kind of selection? Like what's the Venn diagram here between the overlap of all these different kinds of galaxies in each of these structures? Okay, so this is relevant. So how do protocluster selection functions influence observed protocluster trends? So in the literature, people have been characterizing the galaxy properties in the densest part of protoclusters relative to other parts of protoclusters. So for example, on the left here, this is star formation rate versus stellar mass. This is just one example that's showing that the galaxies in the more dense region of the protocluster have higher star formation rates at a given stellar mass than the galaxies in the lower dense regions. And on the right, this is a similar kind of study, but with stellar mass, saying that the galaxies with the highest stellar mass tend to be in the most overdense region compared to elsewhere. Okay, so what did we do? So we want to understand how the observational incompletenesses impact the inferences that people are making from observations of protoclusters. So we went to a simulation and we took what we're going to call a complete or more complete protocluster galaxy population from a simulation. So including the low mass galaxies, the low star formation rate galaxies that maybe wouldn't have been observed in those different kinds of selections that people are using as a baseline population. And then we can ask, so in this first paper, we asked two questions. First is the inferred galaxy density distribution, and specifically the location, the spatial location of the highest density region, is that sensitive to the stellar mass and or star formation rate completeness limit of the observable sample? And then the second question is, does the highest galaxy density region in these more complete protocluster populations from a simulation continue to correspond to sites of enhanced star formation and stellar mass growth? So these claims of sort of accelerated galaxy evolution in the overdense regions, how is that sensitive to the observational selection biases of the protocluster sample? Okay, so to do this, we used the TNG cluster simulation. So this is Lusher's TNG, it's MHD cosmological simulation. Most of the papers from this group are really focused on cluster properties at redshift 0. We use this to go back in time and look at protoclusters. So TNG cluster offers the reason we wanted to use it, it's a unique combination of a large sample of very massive clusters. So 352 clusters at redshift 0 with masses at redshift 0 greater than 10 to the 14.3. And so large statistical sample and high baryonic mass resolution. So 1.2 times 10 to the 7. This is just showing all the different simulations. This is the baryon mass resolution and the number of massive clusters. So we wanted something that was high along both of these axes. So for us, the TNG cluster sample was most appropriate. Okay, so I should have mentioned, this is a paper that's on the archive. It was recently accepted. So it's in press at APJ. So this is showing the assembly history of simulated clusters. So this is the halo mass as a function of redshift. This is redshift 0, redshift 2, redshift 10. So what we did was we split the cluster sample at redshift 0 into 3 different halo mass bins, high, intermediate, and low mass clusters based on their redshift 0 halo mass. And then all of the trends we look at how it depends on the redshift 0 cluster mass. And then this is showing the halo mass as a function of redshift. So you can see the sort of assembly history. This is all of them plotted on top of each other. So a couple points I want to make here is, one is at high redshift, these overlap. So if you're looking at protoclusters at redshift 4, even if you somehow had a way to know what the halo mass was at redshift 4, it's not going to be a good predictor of the redshift 0 halo mass because these overlap. Also, you can't see this with them all on top of each other, but there's a lot of diversity in the growth histories here. So some clusters grow early, some grow late. There's just a lot of diversity, a lot of scatter there. So this is showing the redshift of when these structures cross this canonical 10 to the 14 solar mass threshold as a function of the redshift 0 halo mass. Again, split into our 3 different bins here in redshift 0 halo mass. This is redshift 0 out to 3. And the point is that most of these structures cross that threshold below redshift 2. So we're calling above redshift 2 protoclusters. And again, there's a really large scatter here. Okay, so what do these look like? So this is 4 different clusters at redshift 0. These are 2 in the more massive bin, 2 in the intermediate mass bin. And then these are these same structures at redshift 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And the way that we defined protoclusters is we took all of the galaxies at redshift 0 within this red circle is R200 at redshift 0. So we take all of the galaxies with a stellar mass greater than 10 to the 8.5 at redshift 0. And then we go back in time and use the merger histories, and every galaxy above that stellar mass limit, 10 to 8.5, that either merges or gets stripped or remains and resides within this R200 at redshift 0, we're calling that the protocluster. Okay, so you can see at redshift 0, there's these really nice, obvious structures that are centrally concentrated. Redshift 1, there's definitely overdense regions that are that stand out visually by eye. Redshift 2 and above, things are looking very filamentary. It's not obvious. You can't glance at this and go, there's the core, right? There's not necessarily a centrally collapsed core. And you can see it's a strong function of mass in terms of just how many galaxies you even have at high redshift. Sorry, I should have mentioned the scale. This is in physical megaparsecs, and this is 10 megaparsecs on a side. Okay, so this is defining our baseline population. All the galaxies above 10 to the 8.5 that are progenitors of the galaxies located within the cluster at redshift 0. So this is the evolution of the size of the protocluster. This is the co-moving radius as a function of redshift. This is redshift 0 to 5, and this is a co-moving radius from 0 to 20. And again, this is split into the 3 different redshift 0 halo mass bins. The solid line here is the radius enclosing 90% of the total stellar mass, and the dashed line is R10, which is the radius enclosing 10% of the total stellar mass. So if you think of sort of the core as where the 10% stellar mass is, this is sort of the size of the core, and this is the size of almost the full protocluster. Okay, so that's in co-moving coordinates. This is in physical coordinates. So at redshift sort of 3 in physical coordinates, the most massive clusters at redshift 0 have radii of like 3.5 for the whole protocluster. For the core, it's more like one physical megaparsec. Okay, as an observer, what I want to know is what is that in terms of arc minutes? So here, actually, I'm going to zoom in and show you how this compares to observational samples. So this is the angular radius in arc minutes as a function of redshift for these 3 different redshift 0 halo mass bins, again, for 90% of the enclosed stellar mass and 10% of the enclosed stellar mass. And then I'm going to show you different observational samples on here. So in terms of just what's the angular radius that you need to see the full protocluster, for the most massive protoclusters, it's like a radius of 8 arc minutes out at high redshift. And you can see this is going way back to 1998. Early papers were all down here. So it's only the more recent papers that are getting to a large enough field of view to really capture the full progenitors of the most massive protoclusters at these redshifts. Okay, so failing to capture the full volume is going to impact various things that people are trying to do with protoclusters. So one of the things people like to do is try to infer what the redshift 0 halo mass estimate is going to be. And there's another paper using the Flamingo simulation showing how failing to capture the full protocluster at high redshift is going to impact the halo mass estimates, which are pretty hand-wavy anyway. It's also going to impact ability to observationally constrain, for example, the contribution of protoclusters to the cosmic star formation rate density, reionization, like we heard about earlier from Crystal. So it's really important to have large enough field of view in your observational samples to really capture all of the galaxies that are going to end up in the cluster at redshift 0. Okay, so going back to these 2 questions. The first is the location of the highest density region in terms of the density of galaxies, is that sensitive to the stellar mass or star formation rate completeness limit of your sample? So this is just showing you one example. So here's a structure, protocluster at redshift 2, 3, 4, and 5. The colors are showing you the galaxy density distribution, again, for this baseline population. So all galaxies greater than 10 to the 8.5 that will end up in the cluster at redshift 0. And then the different symbols here are different places. So this is the center of mass. This is the highest galaxy density peak. So if you just look at, count up all the galaxies, there's the highest galaxy density peak. This is the location of the most massive galaxy, which you'll notice is not the highest galaxy density peak. And this is the location of the BCG progenitor, which is also not the highest galaxy density peak. And then this is showing where all of those are at each redshift. And again, this is showing you R10. So that sort of scale of the core, but I'm putting quotes around that. Okay, so this is with the baseline population. So all of the galaxies greater than 8.5. Now, if we make more of an observational type sample out of this, so now we're making a mass limited sample. So we're going up 1 dex. We're saying this is pretty great. Like you're complete to stellar masses of 9.5 all the way out to redshift 5. That's fantastic. If you are, this is the location, the yellow square, of where you're gonna say the highest galaxy density peak is based on your observed sample. And you can see that most of the time, for this one example, it gets the location correct. One of those redshifts, it didn't. Okay, so this was just a visual example of how we're doing this. Now to show you the statistical results. So this is the peak recovery fraction. So how often do you recover the location of the highest density peak correctly as a function of separation between where you are saying it is from your sample versus where it actually is. So let's say you want that to be within one physical megaparsec, because that's the size of the core, R10. So that's this. The different lines here, this is a cumulative fraction. These are the different colors are redshift. So blue is low redshift out to red at high redshift. So in general, at redshift 3 to 5, 60% of the time with a sample that is complete in stellar mass to 10 to the 9.5, 60% of the time you're going to accurately be able to pinpoint the highest density region using your galaxy sample. And so that means 40% of the time you're not, which is high. And then on the rate, this is instead of star formation rate limited, this is star formation rate limited instead of stellar mass limited. So if you instead observe all galaxies above star formation rate of 10, low redshift is different, but high redshift is about the same. 60% of the time, you get that accurately. This is just showing for different stellar mass limits. So this is if you're complete to 10 to the 9, 10 to the 10, 10 to the 10.5. So obviously, the more complete you are, the higher this recovery fraction is. The less complete, the lower the recovery fraction. Okay, so is this location sensitive to stellar mass and or star formation rate completeness limits? Yes. So increasing the stellar mass threshold by 0.5 dex up to 1.5 dex from our baseline sample results in the highest density peaks being misidentified about a third to a half of the time. So within one physical megaparsec. Okay, that was the first question. The second question is, are the highest galaxy density peaks regions of accelerated galaxy evolution? So the way that we are quantifying this, here's again, a protocluster redshift 3. Here's R10 centered on the highest galaxy density peak. If we're going to take the ratio of the average stellar mass within R10 to the average stellar mass outside of R10 and just take that ratio. So is the average stellar mass elevated in the core compared to the rest of the protocluster? This is that ratio. It's a log of a ratio as a function of redshift for these three different redshift 0 halo mass bands. There's not a trend here with redshift or redshift 0 halo mass band. So you can just look at the center plot here. The open circles are the mean and the dashed is the median. This is showing the full distribution. On average, so a ratio of 1 is this green line. On average, the stellar mass ratio is greater than 1 in the core compared to the full protocluster. This is for our baseline population. And then this is showing the ratio of the star formation rates. So again, if you look above redshift 2, so this is redshift 3, 4, and 5, the ratio, it's between 1 and 2. The ratios were higher for the stellar mass ratio. They were closer to 2. But there's a really wide spread here. So there's a lot of variation from protocluster to protocluster. Okay, so are the highest density regions, do they correspond to sites of enhanced star formation and or stellar mass growth? Yes. So the baseline highest galaxy density peaks are generally regions of accelerated mass growth or enhanced star formation compared to the protocluster as a whole. In the paper, I'm not going to show it, but how elevated that is, what that ratio, how much that ratio differs from 1 depends on the observational limits of your sample. And it depends more on stellar mass than star formation rate. So the take home there is if you're not that sensitive, you're not that complete in stellar mass, you're going to find that that ratio is closer to 1. And as you get more complete in stellar mass, that ratio is greater than 1. So you'll see more enhancement in galaxy evolution for a more complete sample. Okay, so last slide. So what are the implications and considerations for observations of protoclusters? So the impact of the limited field of view. So radial apertures less than 4 minutes. I know that sounds really small, but there are lots of papers out there doing this, at least with before a few years ago, should be avoided because they fail to capture the full extent of the progenitors of the most massive galaxy clusters at redshift greater than 2. So radial apertures greater than 8 arc minutes are recommended. So that means the field of view needs to be greater than 16. That's just to see the protocluster, the full protocluster. To even identify the protocluster, you're going to need to survey a larger field of view to find the overdensities. But if you're doing follow-up spectroscopy, for example, that's the field of view, minimum field of view that you want. And then the sensitivity of the highest density peak location. So the location of the highest galaxy density peak in protoclusters is sensitive to stellar mass threshold. It's not as sensitive to star formation rate threshold, with misidentification occurring in about 40% of cases when that mass threshold is raised by 1 dex compared to our baseline population. And accelerated galaxy growth does occur in the highest density regions, and how much is inferred by observations will depend on the observational completeness limits. And again, here is our paper. It has a long title, but it starts with quantifying the impact of incompleteness. And it's Baxter, Coil, and Adler et al. Thank you.
Thanks, Allison. Yeah, Susan, please come down and set up. And I'm going to take the hand in the back here.
A very interesting talk, thanks. So I'm pretty interested in your plot of the pro-PCG positions in the redshift 3 protocluster.
Yeah.
So you show that the most massive halo is already at the center of the protocluster. So I have 2 questions. One is, how do you identify these progenitor of the BCG? Another question is, do we find any different properties for these proto-BCG, such as higher duty cycles, or what's the influence of it like to the large scale environment?
Yeah, so we identify them just by taking the, you can just unplug this, the redshift 0 BCG subhalo, and then you just find the most massive progenitor of that galaxy at high redshift. So you take the main branch of the merger tree for that. We didn't look into the properties of the BCG itself and how it depends on where it is in the protocluster. But yeah, that's a good question. I was surprised. There is in the paper, there is I was about to say it's in the appendix, but it's not. In the main part of the paper, we do quantify that separation, the physical separation between the location of the BCG and the highest galaxy density peak as a function of redshift and redshift 0 halo mass. So you can see how often, like how far away they are.
Okay. I think we're ready to hand over to Susan. Yes? Okay. All right, let's take one last question for Allison while Susan's finalizing.
Great talk, Allison. Very provocative. I have 2 possibly contradictory questions. One is, I'm wondering, because you're showing it's almost impossible to see clusters, I'm wondering what you get for all the hard work that you are trying, it's like, what does this concept mean then? And perhaps to contradict it, I'm wondering if I take the most exceptionally rich clusters we see now, Coma would be, one prototypical example. Are there some that you can follow back, say, a little bit further than the general ones you were looking at?
Yeah. So, okay. So I didn't mean to come across as too pessimistic. You can definitely identify protoclusters. If you have, I mean, this is sort of obvious, but like the larger your field of view and the deeper your data, the better you're going to trace the protocluster. It gets harder at high redshift. These things get really diffuse, right? They were more filamentary looking than I thought they'd be naively, because I don't study these. But I don't mean to imply that you can't do it, but it is a strong function of halo mass. So it's going to be a lot easier for the more massive clusters. I didn't even show you in the paper, the lower mass ones, they just look like a handful of galaxies. Yeah. They're definitely easier. I mean, we went to redshift, I can't remember exactly how far we went, 6 or so. And there's structure there. We didn't go to like redshift 10 or something. We could, but in the paper, we didn't do that.
Okay, let's thank Allison again.